Welcome to Bedtime Whispers, where darkness comes to life and nightmares become reality. The most famous uncaught serial killers. Highway Phantom is the nickname given to an unidentified serial killer known for kidnapping, killing, and raping 6 victims in Washington, D.C. from April 1971 to September 1972. The victims were all young African-American girls between the ages of 10 and 18. There were several investigations over several years. Over 100 potential suspects were processed. Teachers, sex offenders, Air Force personnel, etc. were probed. All searches were fruitless. The Watergate scandal distracted many employees, so the investigation did not continue until 1974. The investigation focused on the Green Vega Rapists gang, whose members were responsible for many kidnappings and rapes in the area. Media attention was riveted on the Green Vega Rapists, but interest quickly faded and everyone stopped believing the killer would be found. The key evidence was synthetic fibers from the green carpet, which were found on all but one of the victims' bodies. In addition, DNA was extracted in 2006 from the killer's semen obtained after an autopsy on one of the victims. However, no matches were found. Regional Night Stalker is the nickname of an unidentified American serial killer from California who killed at least 10 people between 1979 and 1986 and sexually assaulted at least 50 people in Northern California between June 1976 and July 1979. It is worth noting that the conflation of murders with rapes in Northern California did not occur until 2001. Until then, these crimes were considered to have been committed by different people, and the rapist had the nickname East Area Rapist, which literally can be translated as East Area Rapist. The killer with the nickname Regional Night Stalker can be considered one of the most feared and most misunderstood serial criminals in recent U.S. history. The crimes committed by this character, along with the acts of another unidentified serial killer known as the Zodiac, remain one of the most famous and mysterious unsolved serial crimes in American history. It is worth noting that the original Night Stalker is simply less publicized than the Zodiac, which does not make his crimes any less bloody. The perpetrator mostly chose single middle-class women as his victims. Usually, the killer would sneak into the victims' homes and, at gunpoint, tie up the victims. If there was a man in the house in addition to the woman, the killer would beat him up and shoot him with a gun. In most cases, the perpetrator spent much more time on the violence itself than on the robbery itself, and after the sexual perversions, the villain either beat the victim to death or used a firearm. Texarkana Night Hunter is the nickname of an uncaptured serial killer who operated in Texarkana, Texas, in 1946. Other nicknames include Texarkana Phantom, Moonlight Murderer. Murder in big metropolitan areas is common, but in a town on the border between Texas and Arkansas, where car theft is considered the most formidable offense, and people don't even lock their doors at night, in such a town, murder is out of the question. And a serial killer is already a sensation. This is exactly what the Moonlight Killer became. This is one of Phantom's nicknames. The first crime he committed quite originally. He got close to a couple of young people sitting in a car. Then he shot the guy and took on the girl. He did not inflict a single injury on her. He only made some friction with the gun near her underpants, a trail of oil on them, and was scared off by a passing car. But the girl, though she survived, was not able to give a clear statement from the shock, except that the killer was masked and of medium height. And it took a truly phenomenal amount of audacity to attack a house full of people at a time when all the county authorities were looking for him. The prime suspect in the Phantom case was Yul Sweeney, 29, a hijacker arrested in Texarkana in July 1946. He also had a record of counterfeiting, burglary, and robbery. His wife, arrested with him, told police that Sweeney was a phantom and that she was present when he committed the murders. She subsequently changed her testimony frequently and was found to be an unreliable witness. After interrogation in Texarkana, Sweeney was transferred to Little Rock, Arkansas, and interrogated there. In 1947, he was sentenced to life in prison as a repeat offender and could not be released until 1973. Sweeney died in 1994. The Phantom case remains open to this day. The X-Man of New Orleans was a serial killer who operated in and around New Orleans, Louisiana from May 1918 until October 1919. He had probably also committed crimes before. In 1912, the killer attacked his victims with an axe. Sometimes he used the same tool to break down doors in order to get into a house. The crimes stopped as suddenly as they began. The police were never able to catch the Tin Man. His identity is still unknown. Although there are several guesses, not all of the Tin Man's victims died, but the savagery of his attacks kept a huge number of people in fear. The first victims were people of Italian descent. Newspapers wrote that the murders might have been organized by the mafia. However, this version fell away after further crimes. Among the Tin Man's victims was a pregnant woman and a young child, hacked to death right in his mother's arms. The lumberjack seemed to be inspired by the crimes of Jack the Ripper. He wrote poisonous letters to the town's newspapers, alluding to future murders and claiming that he was not human, but a demon from hell. The Long Island serial killer, also Long Island Ripper, Craigslist Ripper, is an unidentified serial killer believed to have killed at least 4 prostitutes since 2000 2007 and scattered their bodies along Ocean Parkway near Gilho Oak Beach, Captree in Suffolk, and Jones Beach Park in Nassau. The remains of 4 possible victims were found in December 2010, 6 more in March and April 2011. The alphabet killer is an unknown person who is credited with a series of murders committed in the early 1970s in Rochester, New York. The alphabet killer is not so bloody, with 3 proven murders of girls. They were raped and strangled, whose first and last names began with the same letter as their town. Carmen Colan in Churchwell, Wanda Walkovich in Webster, Michelle Manza in Macedon, which immediately gave the case a mystical undertone. Although hundreds of people were questioned, the killer was never found. Dennis Termini, the prime suspect in the case, committed suicide 6 weeks after the last murder. In 2007, after DNA samples were tested, all charges against Termini were dropped. The Cleveland Butcher, also known as the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run, was an unidentified serial killer who committed his crimes in Cleveland, Ohio in the 1930s. The official number of murders attributed to the Cleveland Butcher is 12, although recent research has shown that there may have been more. 12 victims were killed between 1935 and 1938. But some investigators, including Cleveland detective Peter Murillo, believe the total number of victims was about 40, both in Cleveland and in Pittsburgh and Youngstown, Ohio, between the 1920s and 1950s. The identities of many of the victims were never established. All of the victims belonged to the lower social level and were therefore easy prey in Cleveland during the Great Depression. Many were members of the working poor who lived in the Cleveland Flats neighborhood. The dismemberment killer always decapitated and often dismembered his victims, sometimes cutting the torso in half. In many cases, death resulted from decapitation. Most of the male victims were castrated, and some victims showed signs of chemical exposure. Many of the victims were found a considerable time after death, sometimes a year or later. This made identification nearly impossible, especially if heads were not found. Zodiac was a serial killer who operated in Northern California and San Francisco, USA, in the late 1960s. The identity of the criminal has not yet been established. He is one of the most notorious of the unrecovered killers. This serial killer is remembered for a series of taunting messages to the local press and mysterious ciphers attached to them. The killer chose the nickname Zodiac of his own accord. He mentioned it in a series of letters he sent to local newspapers. The letters were accompanied by cryptograms which, according to the murderer himself, hid the secret of his identity. In all, 4 cryptograms were received from the Zodiac. Only one of them could be deciphered. 4 men and 3 women between 16 and 29 years old were attacked. 5 were killed. 2 managed to survive. Many suspects were named during the investigation, but no convincing evidence was presented to implicate any of them in the murders. Jack the Ripper is the pseudonym given to the never-known serial killer, who operated in Whitechapel and the surrounding London area in the second half of 1888. The name is taken from a letter sent to the Central News Agency, whose author claimed responsibility for the murders. Many experts believe the letter is a fabrication created by journalists to fuel public interest in the story. The Ripper's main victims were prostitutes from the slums, whose throats the killer cut before opening their abdomens. The removal of internal organs from at least 3 of the victims led to the assumption that the killer had a certain anatomical knowledge, typical of a professional surgeon. Rumors that there was a connection between the murders intensified between September and October 1888, and many letters were received by various publishers and Scotland Yard, allegedly written in the killer's hand. The famous letter from hell, which was received by George Lusk of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, had attached a human kidney belonging to one of the victims. Because of the incredible brutality of the murders and the various information that appeared in the newspapers, many were convinced that a single serial killer, nicknamed Jack the Ripper, was operating in London. February 9 Killer, the nickname of an unidentified American serial killer from Utah. All of the victims resided in Salt Lake County. The murders were committed on February 9, 2006 and February 9, 2008. Because of the common date of the crimes, the killer got his nickname. The first victim was pregnant Sonia May of Taylorsville on February 9, 2006. She was raped and strangled with a wire in her own apartment. Her unborn child also died. The victim's car, 2 rings and pendant were missing. 4 days later, a Ford Escort belonging to May was found in the nearby town of Murray. Exactly 2 years later, on February 9, 2008, Damiana Castillo Ramirez, 57, was murdered in her West Valley City apartment. Just like the first victim, she was strangled to death. Ramirez probably let the killer in on her own, as police found no sign of forced entry. In 2006, police were contacted by a witness who saw Sonia May interacting in the doorway with an unknown man. The man punched the victim and pushed her into the apartment. Based on the witness's testimony, detectives assumed the killer was a young, early 20s, Hispanic man with short, dark hair. The approximate height of the perpetrator is 160,165 cm. Weight is 6,168 kg. A bottle of Coke and a bag of chips were found at the scene, which, according to the witness, the killer brought with him. DNA samples were taken. In 2009, a comparative DNA test was conducted that linked the unsolved murders of Sonia May and Damiana Castillo Ramirez. It was suspected that a serial killer was on the loose. On February 9, 2009, the state police went on heightened alert, but the killer was never caught. In 2011, the case stalled and was classified as unsolved. The perpetrator's DNA samples are stored in a national database. The killer goes by the assumed name of John Doe. Thank you so much for your attention. Subscribe to the channel. See you soon.